We are live. Hi, everybody. The Word Nerds are here to talk about Antagonists today, which is perfect for October and Halloween. I expect all you guys to practice your most evil laugh and the finger steepling.
Perfect.
So we're going to talk a little bit first about who is your favorite antagonist, excuse me, not protagonist. So we'll go down the line, and Macon is first here.
Ooh.
Who's your favorite antagonist? Any TV or book series? Everything.
So I've thought about this a lot this week. And I don't know if I have like one super favorite one, but one that for some reason right now, probably because it's Halloween time, kept coming to mind is I love the Jacks of All Trade in the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. That it's like so spooky and creepy and like bad, but you kind of like them.
Yeah.
So it's been forever since I read that book.
Yeah.
Go back.
And I have Rachel next.
Are we talking about antagonists in the form of villains or just other?
It could be like
supporting characters.
No, antagonist is like a villain, but it could be like a kind of in between anti-hero. We could still technically use that.
I just finished reading Muse of Nightmares by Lady Taylor, so I really like Minya as she's so creepy and messed up and always has to throw a wrench in plans. She's great. I like her a lot.
She's like such a terrible antagonist, but such a good one at the same time. She's so frustrating.
So frustrating.
Because she's one of those characters, and Lainey talked about this recently, like she's one of those characters where like nothing you do can change her mind. Yeah. You like want so desperately to change her mind.
So frustrating.
Yeah.
I know people like that in real life.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And then I have Helen next down the line.
I'm actually gonna pull from like my happy movie, but Mother Gothel from Tangled.
Ooh,
probably up there for me. She's just the right amount of manipulative, where like if you were in Rapunzel's position, like you wouldn't think that she's evil, and I love that.
Mm-hmm. Emma next.
No. I have not been thinking about this all week. I'm like, there's like an ambulance. There's just so many good ones. I'm having trouble deciding. I'm gonna go with a really obvious one that I know we're gonna talk about anyway, but like I hate Umbridge so much.
Yeah.
Like she's like, I feel like one of the perfect examples of like what an antagonist should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Desiree.
Okay, so my favorite antagonist, I could only narrow it down to two because I'm a big fan of like antagonists in general. So the first one is Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb.
Yes.
He's like the best antagonist because he's terrible at his job. And deep down, he's actually not a bad person. And Missy from Doctor Who.
Oh, good one.
So I'm gonna actually go. I totally thought someone was going to pick this because like we always go back to this.
Is it a Raven boy?
I'm gonna have to say the Gray Man from the Raven Boys. Like he has this like incredible transformation, and that is the type of stuff I like. And it's so funny because I say like I love morally gray characters, and he's literally called the Gray Man. So of course he's one of my favorites. And he is just like the epitome of a gray character, right? Like he's not good, but then he's sort of also eventually on the right team, but still probably willing to use techniques that, are not necessarily good guy type of thing. And then I also have to say like special mention to Not Even Bones. Because the whole cast is just weird and gray and creepy, and nobody is a good guy, and I loved it. So
it's just a book full of antagonists.
Yeah, that's sort of my favorite type of book, to be honest. So yeah, and so I guess the other question is like, what do you love about those that make you say that this is my favorite. And I'm pretty clear about mine. I like it because they're like morally in a gray area and you're not sure if they're a bad guy or not, or a good guy or not. And that's what I love about my favorite villains.
Yeah.
What about you guys? Do you have anything particular?
I mean, I agree with that. Like the morally gray, like my point of view on antagonists is everyone's the hero of their own story. So the antagonist is doing what they think is right, or, you know, not necessarily all the time, but the best antagonists, in my opinion, are doing what they deem is right or correct. But you're always seeing stories from the hero's point of view, which makes the antagonist seem bad. But if you had a story from the antagonist's point of view, you might end up thinking they're the hero, you know, by the end of the story, which is another reason why I liked Nimona so much, because there was a lot of gray, you know, with the villains. So,
yeah, well, even I read Wild Card a little while ago, which is a sequel to Warcross, and the villain, actually that duology did it very well, because like the villain and the hero are very similar people. I won't spoil too much of it, but the way that like you think it's one person because they're stereotypically bad, and then you realize that it's the other person because they're doing something so good that it has gone bad, and then, you know, that other person is maybe not doing the wild card, like maybe not, you know, like they're trying to stop something good because it's bad. Like it's really weird. It's like a mind trip. So she did that really well, where you're like, I want to root for both of you because that's a good idea, but also a bad idea. So I want you to stop the good idea, but then we need to somehow implement the good idea again. Like it was great.
I love a good villain who knows exactly what they want and has a lot of very compelling reasons for it. Like those are the villains that scare me the most. Think like Aiden in the Illuminae series, or like Thanos even. Is this idea of like, oh no, those are actually like kind of solid reasons why you want to do the things that you want to do, and like really making the reader or the viewer come to terms with, well, why do I think that's a bad thing? And like you want to root against them, but you kind of are like second guessing. I just it messes with my head, and I love it.
Like that's one of the reasons I liked Killmonger so much in Black Panther.
Oh
yeah, the only villain like that I know of from any story I've ever like watched or read who actually changed the hero's mind. Like, which is like so crazy, because like it was this big deal. He was the antagonist because he had these views and he went about it the wrong way, but in the end, he ended up changing the hero's mind. Like, it's so good.
I just rewatched Black Panther this weekend, and I was like thinking about like how well done that is. Because you're like, this guy has some good ideas, and then he's like, I've killed a bunch of other African people to get here, and you're like,
It's like
silly the way you go about getting promoted, but
doing it the wrong way.
Yeah, he's like, we have to do this to save Black people, but also I'm going to pit you all against each other and make you go to war and kill each other. And I was like, wait, what?
Like, wait a second. Wait.
I was following you, and then suddenly I wasn't.
But like, it's also
for a little more, I think. But
the like terrible things that have happened to him have like corrupted him to this point too. You know, like that he has these like great ideals, but like he's been through such terrible things that like he feels like this is the only way. You know, because like, there's no other way to accomplish what he thinks needs to be done. So.
I think the best villains or antagonists are the ones that have that motivation that you can kind of get behind and be like, okay, and you're with them up until a certain point, and then also they're sympathetic because of that, and it's like a double thing. I think that makes it so confusing is you're like, yeah, I get what you're trying to do, and like he has that past where you're like, I feel bad for you, so you're sympathizing with him, and then it's just that little thing where you're like, but you murder a lot of people.
Yeah. It's like you're like, it's like I feel like it's that crowd like,
deal breaker.
Like, yeah. And then he says something and you're like, wait.
I feel like Kingsman did that really well too. I don't know if any of you have seen Kingsman.
I have.
Yes,
it's really good.
It's so good, but
so good.
The villain in it, like there's a scene where he's sitting down and talking to the president, and he's explaining why he's doing what he's doing, and the entire time he's talking, it's like, yeah, Yeah, that's true. You're making some very valid arguments. Oh, you want to eradicate the human race because of that, though. See, now you've lost me.
Hold on a minute.
Like right up until there, it's like, oh, but I get why you're doing it. His motivations are very clear and they make sense, and it's unnerving.
I also love like a good villain who just like feels like completely unbeatable. Like, and I feel like those are really hard to write because you have to find a way for your characters to beat them. Yeah. But I love that like feeling when you're reading a story and you just feel like there's like that frustration. Like you feel like there's nothing the characters can do because the antagonist has like influence or power or something, you know, like that like makes it so impossible to fight against them. Like everything you do, they have a way to combat it. And I love that feeling when I'm reading. Yeah, just like wanting to throw the book against the wall because I'm like, why can't they like get a step ahead? You know?
Yeah, for me, it's to a point. Like I do love that, but there needs to be some way they can.
Oh yeah, eventually they have to, and that's why.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I really hate about supernatural horror movies. Like I love the Halloween movies, and I watch them every single Halloween, even though they're so bad. But Michael Myers as a bad guy frustrates the crap out of me. I don't know if he's supposed to be like supernatural or not, but he's impossible to kill. And I find that so frustrating. I'm like, no, they need a way of fighting him. They need the tools to fight him. Or there's no stakes because you're like, well, they're all going to die. Right. I already know that. So
yeah, you definitely have to feel like they're somehow going to do it, but it's always like, but how? Because nothing's working.
Yeah.
I especially love like characters that have like power or privilege, like they're in a place of like influence and stuff where like everything the protagonists try to do, like they're right there being like, nope, actually, like I have the ear of like the president, so they'll do whatever I say.
That's why I loved Muse of Nightmares so much. I won't spoil anything in case people do want to read it, but like Emma, you know what I mean, because like
I've only read the first book, but yeah.
I thought you read Muse of Nightmares. Okay,
I haven't read Muse yet.
Oh, okay. Well, you should. It's great. But one of the new characters that we meet in Muse of Nightmares kind of has that ability to like negate some of the powers that are present, and I love that idea so much because there's so many supernatural or superhero or whatever books where it's this character can do this, so they're unbeatable, and you need to like find a way around it. But when suddenly if they don't have that power anymore, they're done for. And like at that point, it's a little bit like that's it. Like okay. They just don't have the power anymore. But if they don't have the power and they're still good at something, like or stuff's still in motion, then that's when I'm like, oh, you covered all your bases, and it's not just like a, not just a. Yeah, sorry, I'm like I don't have it. I just finished watching The Hate You Give, and I can't form actual thoughts. And I look terrible because I cried all my makeup off and tried to put it back on, and I'm just having an emotional day. Okay.
I can't wait to go see that movie.
That is like one of those stories I feel like where like there's more of like an antagonistic force rather than an actual antagonist. Like the system is the antagonist. Yeah. But it is one of those where like it feels so insurmountable and so frustrating because you're like, no matter what she says, there's always somebody there being like, oh, but he was dealing drugs. Oh, but
it's also because it's a real life problem. It's not like you're like Voldemort. You're like, no, this is systematic and real and in my world.
And it's a thing you see happen on the news where like someone gets killed and you're like, this is terrible, and then people are like, oh, but he was a drug dealer, like, or oh, he like got arrested one time for like being drunk on the street, like, you know, like, obviously he deserved, you know, and it's just like so hard to fight back. And it kind of goes back to that whole thing with Minya in the Strange the Dreamer Muse of Nightmares duology, that like she will not change her mind about like her terrible like beliefs, no matter what you say or do. She's like completely fixed in them. Which is such a like real issue, which I think is
that's why it's so frustrating, I think, as a reader, when even in a fantasy world, when you're reading about someone like that has such a
because you know people like that.
Yeah, you know people like that in real life. You like go to Thanksgiving dinner and some of your relatives are like that, and you're like, oh my god, it's like Uncle whatever is in this book, and it becomes like 100 times more frustrating. Yeah.
Well, even I'm trying to think like.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, well, I'm like, do I bring it? Let's just bring up V.E. Schwab because it's going to happen eventually. But because I've read Vengeful a little while ago, which like, that Eli and Victor's struggles of like getting powers and then dealing with them and like how they're going to deal with it, especially Eli, because he's like, I have been blessed with this power, but no one else deserves it because we're all wrong, so I'm going to go kill everybody that has powers. And you're like, dude, maybe not the way to go around that, but I get where he's coming from. Again, like the morally gray thing, but like he will not stop. And people are like, hey, have you thought about seeing it this way? And he's like, okay, I see your point. I'm gonna keep killing people now. And you're like, dude, no, like that's like, I know you get it, especially in Vengeful. If anyone watching this has not read it, I won't say too much, but he goes through so much that would give him access to change his mind and like a reason to change his mind. And at the very end, he's like, nope, I set out to do what I'm gonna do, and I'm still gonna go do it.
Interesting.
Like that was, yeah. So like he does have an arc, but he also goes back to the very beginning, being like, I am set in my beliefs. And I'm like, oh, I still like you though, but like, oh man.
That's fascinating. I still haven't read that one, but it's sort of like, it does go back to real life too sometimes, where like you do have that. I've never seen that character arc actually, where they go through all this change and then decide to revert back. Like it's almost like you've brainwashed yourself and you're not capable of growth anymore. And again, I feel like I know that actually people like that in real life. Yeah. So that would be very frustrating, I feel like, especially to go on that whole arc with him and then be like, oh, you're back where you started.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about gets back where he sorry. Oh. He like gets back where he started because of like the way that everybody else treats him. And like he's seeing kind of like he's seeing what his worst nightmare is. So he goes back to what he originally thought, even though like he was working into maybe seeing it differently.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's such a good book. But yeah, he's really fascinating. I like him a lot.
Yeah. Eli in both Vicious and Vengeful, you learn this in like the first, however, like very early on in the first book, that like his thing is super strength regeneration abilities. And so, like, he is a villain who you literally cannot kill. But somehow V.E. Schwab still makes it seem very much like, oh, well, we have to beat him. We're going to find a way to beat him. And I've tried to figure out how she did it, and I'm still not totally sure how she did it, where it was like he's so unkillable, but still you felt yourself rooting for Victor to defeat him somehow. We had a question for Marshmallow Cast. Do you think you can have more than one antagonist?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, I was actually thinking about this about hate you give. Like, I was like, how do I somehow put this in the chat? I just need to talk about it. That there's in writing, there's multiple ways of building conflict. It's like person versus nature, which would be like superpowers, person versus society, which would be like the hate you give, where there's a system that's standing in the way. So you can do multiples, you can do all of them. It would make your story more interesting if you have more than just like, oh, this person's fighting with this person over not picking up milk, like the end. It's like, oh, but there's also this whole society problem, or also a bunch of these people with superpowers are coming in, so you can mix and match.
So one of the other questions I had for you guys was, what is your number one tip to write a realistic antagonist? I keep wanting to say protagonist. It's not what I want to say. What's your number one tip of writing a realistic antagonist? And have Megan again on my left.
To me, I think the most important thing is that they're present on the page, even if they're not like physically in the room with your characters all the time. It needs to feel like a force that is there and not just like a looming, oh, someday I'm going to have to face down this big bad. That was like a problem I ran into all the time when I was first starting writing, was like, well, we're going to learn all of the fun magic for 250 pages, and then the antagonist will show up in the last 50, and we'll have a fight. But they need to be there, and they need to be increasing the tension, and it needs to be clear that your bad guy is making moves on their own, even if you're not showing it, although I am a big fan of showing it. It needs to be clear that they're working towards something in the background, too, while your protagonist is working.
I would say have them anticipate what your protagonist is going to do. Because if you have a villain that's just like, la-di-da, oh, hey, oh, wow, you want to fight now? I guess, well, I have this, like, horde of faceless people that can just fight for me, like, whatever. Like, you need to have them anticipating that, that, you know, the hero is, oh, they almost beat me this time, so they're going to be doing this, so, like, I better... Words. I'm having a real tough time today. Oh my god, I'm just not having.
You're allowed.
Yes, like anticipate the other characters' moves and don't just have them
reacting.
I'll say that. It's like, oh, you know, you only need this amulet to defeat the villain, and then you get the amulet, and then the villain's like, oh man, I've been defeated. You're like, what? Yeah, oh man, got me again. Like,
That was actually like one of the issues I had with Queen of the Tierling, is I felt like the antagonist, who was like the Red Queen, just like sat around in her palace all book being like, oh no, this girl. What do I do?
I think the main problem I see when I see a villain that I don't think of as realistic is if they're evil for the sake of being evil. And sometimes it's very over the top and it's not logical for their goal. It's just almost feels as if the writer is going in and being like, what can I do that will be the most shocking, most horrific, most evil thing?
What if they twirl their mustache here?
Yeah, like, yeah, exactly. And I don't necessarily think that anyone goes into life saying to themselves, I'm going to be as evil as possible today. I woke up on the evil side of the bed today.
Yeah.
What shall I
Speak
do?
for yourself.
Yeah.
bring me a puppy to kick. Like,
Exactly. Nobody thinks like that. It really is, everyone is the own hero of their story, and they think what they're doing is right or necessary. So I think that's important when you're thinking about your bad guy's motivation and how he or she is achieving what they want, is they're probably only going to do what's necessary, and not what is the most evil. So yeah, I think, because I noticed none of us mentioned a bad guy that was really, really evil. Like, no one is like, Voldemort is my favorite all-time villain of it, because he's kind of, he is a little bit, you know, like,
he's very flat. He's a flat character.
Yeah,
like,
flat. Get it? Because his face is flat. He has no nose, but he's really kind of that stereotypical villain, right? And to me, he wasn't particularly nuanced, and that's why when you say who's your favorite villain from Harry Potter, no one usually says him. It's like Umbridge or something, right? Because Umbridge, I loved her because she's the definition of what's that D&D term? Lawful evil.
Yes.
I really like how she's done, because it's all order and rules, but she uses the law in the most evil way possible.
And like goes back to Megan's advice that, like, I think part of the problem is that Voldemort doesn't have a lot of screen time, which, like, I think it can work if you have a character that's not really on the page, but you have a lot of people being like, this person's terrible. You know, you can build stakes that way. And it works for certain stories, and it works for Harry Potter. It does. But that's why he's not a super, like, he's not people's favorite villain, is because you don't really see a lot of him. And yeah, it's just kind of, he shows up at the end of each book and is like, oh, time to fight Harry.
I think you're right. I think it works for the book series because you've got smaller villains that are more memorable, like Malfoy and his parents and Snape, and he's another kind of gray sort of villain that I do not love. I know everyone loves Snape a lot. It seems like, okay, I'm shaking your head. I never liked him. I never found him sympathetic.
I don't like him.
The funny thing is, when I love the actor who plays him. So when
Alan
I'm
Rickman's
watching,
so great.
yeah. So when I'm watching the movie, I'm like, oh, Alan Rickman. But when I read the books again, I'm like, he's a piece of crap. Like, Harry's 12 when he first gets to school, and Snape is like, well, and I'm like, you're an adult, and he's 11, right? He's a tiny little kid, and this adult is going, singling him out and being Anyways, I have thoughts. I don't care what crush you had on your mother.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things I was thinking about was how a problem, particularly in middle grade or YA, that you run into is, why does your villain want to fight a child?
Yes.
And you have to make it a really solid reason, because otherwise it seems petty, like Snape trying to take on Harry all the time. It's like, why would you? He's a kid. Back off.
Yeah, it really does. When you're a kid, you're like, yes, right, this makes sense. He's the bad guy. As an adult, you go back and read it, and you're thinking, what the heck is wrong with this guy?
Like, pick on someone your own size.
He's a teacher picking on an 11-year-old. That's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, I think for Voldemort it makes sense because there's this prophecy and he's going to defeat Harry so that he himself can live. But with Snape, he's just a douchebag.
Just petty.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, I think Snape is a really interesting character. Like his motivations are like it's a very interesting story and all this stuff, but like I hate him.
Yeah, I don't get the love. I think is what it is. I don't get the love that fans really, a lot of them seem to have for the actual character, not Alan Rickman. Excuse me, love him.
I think it's the confusion. Like do you love Snape or do you love Alan Rickman? Like people who hate Ron, it's like, do you hate book Ron or do you hate movie Ron?
Yeah, I think it's like a bit of Alan Rickman, but also like there was a big increase in Snape love after we found out his backstory and his motivation, and people were like, "Oh, it's so romantic." I'm like, "That is not romantic.
Not a healthy relationship."
Yeah.
No.
I think that's another aspect of his villainhood, honestly, because he got weird and stalkery and possessive. And he was so cruel to, this woman he apparently loved. He was so cruel to her son. And that's not love. That's weird possession.
It's like, I was gonna say it's like weird possessiveness. Like,
yes.
Like I used to be like a huge like Snape lover. Like when I was like in middle school reading the books, I was like, I really liked him. And then now I'm an adult and I'm like, like I work with kids too. So it's like, Harry's literally like a child. He's like essentially like a tall toddler at 11. Like, how do you be mean to this like little kid who has no idea what's going on around him? Right. He has no idea the Wizarding World existed. He has no one he can turn to. And you claim to have been in love with his mother, but all you do is make his life like worse. Like what?
Like literally think about the fact that Harry's an orphan and Snape's like, let's crap on this child.
It's just for the parents he doesn't even remember.
And Griswold pointed out too, the way he treats Neville is also awful. And Neville doesn't even have any like petty reason to be treated that way. Like,
no, Neville's just
Neville has parents who he has to visit who have lost their minds because of the Cruciatus curse, but he's more afraid of Snape than that.
Wow.
No.
Yeah, that puts things into perspective.
It's just Snape should not be around children. Like,
no,
he should know. Why did he decide to use that as
one of Dumbledore's many poor decisions?
But I think this proves, though, that he's a great antagonist.
Yeah,
so strongly.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so that was my question. What's your number one tip about writing a good antagonist? Creepy.
That's another tangent.
Yeah. I don't know.
I also like when an antagonist, something I always think about when I'm like creating my antagonists is like how they relate to the main character, like in like building the character, if that makes sense. Like I think Rachel was, I can't remember what book you were talking about now. It was something I haven't read. But you were talking about like two characters. It was Wildcard. You're talking about like two characters who are like very similar. And I like that. I like when you have like a protagonist and an antagonist that have something in common, but like there's a divergence too, like if they both have like a really similar motivation, but like what they're willing to do for it is different, or if they have like opposing motivations or opposing goals. Just like thinking about that, especially when you're thinking about like their goals and their fears and their motivations, like how can you like make them foils of each other?
I also just remembered, because I looked over at my bookshelf, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot to mention the Commandant from An Ember in the Ashes.
Oh, God.
Because, my lord, Karis, I hate her so much. And throughout the whole series, I read all 3 in that series. And the thing that makes her so amazing, but so horrible, is that she foils everything. And you think that you get an inch, and that's all you get because she's gonna stomp you down again, and like you can't win. And you think that you can win, and then you sort of win, but like surprise, there's been like 6 things in the works that you didn't know about. That now like everything's messed up again, and there like is no hope left. In every single book, like it's just
The end of the second book was so frustrating because it has that where like she's like outwitted everyone, and you're like, no, not again. You like think the characters have the upper hand and they don't.
I know, but like that's why I love her so much, because she has outwitted everybody, and you constantly think like, oh no, like we're gonna get her this time. Especially in the third book, Helene, which also references what Emma was saying about like having your villain like build on a character. Because that really happens with Helene in the third one, especially, and like she goes through this giant change because of how close she is with the commandant, like what's happening at the time, and like how the commandant's using her is just a total character overhaul. And it's like everything's awful, and you just like, oh god, Karis, but like she's so brilliant that like you admire her for being able to foil every single thing, but you also hate her because she foils everything.
And you're like, to have been a woman in like among the masks, like you, like I applaud you because like, you survived, but also you're terrible.
And like we know that and this again from the beginning when we're like, oh, we need to be able to beat them. There is a way, like I know we can. There's enough hints that there's like something, somehow. We can just like beat her, destroy her, overtake her, what have you, but we just haven't reached it yet. And that's what makes it so frustrating, is because she's spoiling everything before we can reach an idea of how to take her down. So I think she's extremely well written in that respect.
Mm-hmm. So if you guys could have written any villain, or could write any villain, who would it be? Not necessarily your favorite, or something inspired by, because I was just looking through lists of villains for funsies, and I really want a Cruella de Vil type villain, because I've always loved her. She's just so over the top about everything. She drives like a mad woman. Her hair is ridiculous. She wears crazy jackets. I love that type of villain aesthetic, and I would love to do something like that, but with magic, of course, because everything has magic.
Of course.
Yeah, Black Magic Cruella de Vil would be really fun to write, I think.
That would be really fun. That'd be fun to read. Like, I was thinking about other villains that I really, really liked, and like one popped in my head that I forgot is like one of my favorites, and that's Scar from The Lion King.
Oh,
He's such a good villain. He might be the best villain ever. Like,
yes,
he doesn't monologue. Like, he was like, I'm gonna kill my brother, and that's what he did, and it was done. Like,
he gives one line and then he does it.
It's a great line.
Yeah.
Scar was one of my favorites because his personality was so great. He was just really droll and sarcastic, and I love that. I would love to do. That's another villain. There's a lot of really good classic Disney villains. I would love to kind of do a rewritten YA version of them or something. That would be really fun.
I won't name any of these because I feel like they're spoilers, but I'd love to write the type of villain that like is someone that you like trust like all along, like through the whole book. You like think they're on your side and you trust them, and then you like find out they were like the last person you should have trusted.
Yeah, I'm thinking of one character in particular that fits that mold.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like a couple.
Recent one. So I was gonna say Harry Potter has a great example of that, obviously. Like the whole time you love Mad Eye Moody.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like, no. Oh my gosh, I have the best story about that. So my husband read Harry Potter for the first time after we got married. And so I got to be there like reliving it as he read all of the books. And when he was reading Goblet of Fire, he turned to me and he said, I just don't know. I don't trust anyone. Well, there's one person I trust. Mad Eye Moody.
Poor Jared. He must have been so betrayed at the end of the book.
Oh, man. Bless.
It's such a cool thing. Like, he was even doubting Hagrid at one point because Hagrid was being shady, but he trusted this one character. Like, how did she do it?
It was so... I think it's because he really was meant to be initially... she's so clever. I don't know how she did this, but initially, you're not sure if you should trust him, and then you're like, oh, he's just a little crazy, a little rough around the edges, but he's a good guy. And then they keep building that as you're reading, And you keep thinking more and more like, yeah, you can really trust him, even though he's a little bit rough around the edges. You can really trust this guy. And then boom, drop the mic.
Yeah. And yeah, there's like so many like distractions and misdirections, and she's really good about that. Like I feel like she's really good about hiding answers like in plain sight. But because she puts so much like little detail in the story, you'll like see a little detail and you're like, oh, that doesn't mean anything because she's put all these other little details in. But like that one actually meant something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was actually just glanced at my bookshelf. One that I thought was a very good pairing was the demon and the angel character from Good Omens, which is, oh my gosh, being made into a TV show, and I'm so freaking excited because it looks like it's going to be amazing. But the whole kind of story of Good Omens is that like the apocalypse is going to happen. The Antichrist has been born, and like if the angel gets to it, then the world will be saved. And if the demon gets to it, then like the horsemen of the apocalypse are going to rise up, and like everything's going to be overtaken. But the angel and the demon are friends. They've been friends for millennia, and they both just like to literally antagonize one another and like play practical jokes on like an angel level, and like be sarcastic and horrible, and like blow something up on the demon level, and just like mess with each other. And then they are the ones that are being sent to like save the world, basically. But the way that they like talk about each other is like, oh man, that old guy, like, oh, he's getting in my way, like that kind of thing. So you like both of them because they're both hilarious and they're both great characters. That you like kind of want to root for both of them along the way of like, yeah, you foil that guy's plans, and like, oh, but we know he's gonna foil you later, like, yeah, haha, like jokes on you, like the whole time. So I really appreciate that writing because you love both of them, and besides it being like an angel and a demon, they're like not a good and bad. They're just kind of like there, and they just like to mess with each other. So I think that was so good because it's not necessarily a villain relationship; it's just an antagonizing relationship.
Mm-hmm. That's Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Such a good duo.
Such a good duo. Such a good book.
Yeah. They both write really good villains, but obviously, like, I'm going to say Neil Gaiman is amazing because he writes some of the best villains. I love all of his villains in American Gods in particular. He does such a good job.
Well, I'm like, I want to bring up a point that like antagonists aren't necessarily always villains. They're just someone that antagonizes the character. So you could say that Mr. Wednesday is an antagonist.
Oh, he absolutely is.
Yeah, and like I love him for that because he's not really a villain, but he's still like, let's just push you over, do that. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And Shadow's like, this is not okay. And he's like, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. You can just do it.
Well, even because they're all gods, even the good ones that are very obviously good initially, the way they, what you were saying, play games on a demon and angel level.
Like, yeah,
because these
humans,
are gods.
like, yeah.
Yeah. They're like, hey, Shadow, go hang yourself on a cross for 12 days or whatever it is they make him do.
He does do that. Or is he on a tree? He's like wrapped around a tree or something
like he almost dies because they're gods and they're like, we're not playing, we're on another level than you, and you might die, not because we don't like you, you just might die.
Because you're a human.
I can't remember, one of the Russian gods, like one of the Russian gods is like, oh, I'll cut your hand off if I don't like the story you tell me, or whatever it is, right?
They play like a Russian roulette kind of thing. Yeah, and it's like, oh, I think it's like, if you can beat me at chess, like I won't kill you in the morning. And he's like, okay.
Yeah, something like that. I won't smash you with my hammer or whatever it is. I can't quite remember. But yeah, he's not a bad guy. He's a good guy, but he'll still kill you. Yeah, so it's still an antagonist. So I love the way they do that. Neil Gaiman does that.
Yes, amazing.
We had a question from N. Griswold. I'm trying to figure out a good reveal that isn't the antagonist stepping out from the shadows saying, "It was I." What's your favorite villain reveal?
That's a good question.
It's a very good question.
I would say like let your reader and your character figure it out. Like rather than having like the antagonists like reveal themselves. Like I like when when the character and or the reader can figure it out like a moment before the antagonists reveal themselves.
Yeah, that's one of the best feelings, I think, as a reader, is piecing it together with the character, and you realize just as that character says, oh, but and you have that aha moment with the character, and then of course it's usually the antagonist is like, I know, you know, and then they go to try to kill them or whatever, you know, as you do.
Yeah.
Usually it's like in Mad Eye Moody's example, he was sort of saying things that didn't make sense if he was a good guy, like things he couldn't have known, that type of thing. And then you're slowly starting to piece together the fact that, hey, Carrie didn't say that it happened in a graveyard. He shouldn't know this stuff. And then little things like, I love how they did it in the movie where you can see the faux glass. You can see people getting closer in the faux glass and you're starting to figure it out.
That's in the book too. It talks about how like the shapes are getting clearer and clearer. And then like finally he sees that it's like Dumbledore and McGonagall.
Yeah. That's a really clever way of piecing it all together at the same time.
And then like once Harry like figures it out, then Mad Eye's like, yep. What
are you gonna do?
Instead of like being like, it is I, you know, like Harry gets
sweep the cape back.
One of my favorite villain reveals of ever wasn't even like a huge villain, but it's in season 1 of Lost, I think, where you've got Hurley is making a manifest of all the people who were on the plane, and Claire, the pregnant girl, is out in the woods and she's having contractions, and so Hurley is working on this separate mission and suddenly realizes that there's one person who's with them who was not on the plane with them. And then you like jump over to Claire's point of view and she's with that guy.
Of course.
And instead of him being like, I'm going to kidnap you and take you to the others now, he just moves to action. He doesn't have to explain that he's the villain. He's just going to do a villainous thing to this person. And just as a viewer watching it unfold like that, and then later I read the script of that episode and like reading the script too, just feeling all the tension amping up as I, the viewer, knew that there was something wrong with him, even though she didn't quite know yet that there was something wrong with him. It's just so good.
They do a really similar thing, I think, in season 3. It's either 2 or 3 with Ben, where like they find this guy who claims that like he like crash landed on the island and like his wife died. He like gives them a name, and so they're like he's like staying with them. And then they eventually, like later in the episode, like, or it's a few episodes later, I think, they find like the spot where like, I think it was like, I don't remember what he.
It was a hot air balloon with a smiley face on it.
Yeah, they find the hot air balloon and like they find the man's like driver's license, I think, like his ID, and it's the name, but it's a different face. And so like you realize, like
his
they and you realize
so
that it's not him. Yeah.
And I think that's why sometimes a multiple point of view works really well, because you can have that situation where one character realizes something about someone, or even the author can show you what the bad guy's doing, and then you skip to the next scene and the other character has no idea and the reader knows. And that creates a lot of tension, which reader is one of my favorite things an author can do to me. The tension.
Yeah. It's a little more difficult to do in a single point of view. But I think it's still possible, for sure.
You can still have your character discover something.
And you can still lay enough clues down that it makes sense that your character hasn't figured it out yet, while your reader might be a little more suspicious.
But that's such a fine balance. And it's really hard to get. Because there's nothing more frustrating as a reader when you're reading something and it seems really obvious to you and the main character hasn't picked up on it yet, and that becomes very frustrating very fast. So that is something you can do, but boy, you have
get a lot of beta readers.
Yeah. Takes some skill.
Yeah, I think ideally you really want your reader to figure it out like a page before the character does. You know, because if the reader figures it out too early, unless there's like a legitimate reason that the character isn't going to know, then it gets like dumb.
And it really does immerse you in the story. Like my favorite are when you literally figure it out. Like even just a paragraph before big reveal, and because it feels like it's unfolding with you, and that's the best feeling.
I love when the layout works out perfectly so that like you figure it out and then you flip the page, like and then it's there.
That's one of the fun things about like old school mystery novels is they're like the reveal's coming. Take a second if you want to figure it out. You have everything you need to know now.
That's true. The Agatha Christie kind where you know they're all in a room and it's about to get revealed, and you can bookmark it and be like, okay, I can guess a minute. Yeah, very Clue feeling. Colonel Mustard in the living room with a candlestick.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about how it can be frustrating but satisfying having a villain where it feels like there's no way to defeat them. But I love the show Supernatural. I'll preface it by saying that. But one of my pet peeves about that show is that they have all these good villains, but every season they're like, and look, we can't kill a demon, but in season 2, we've come across this blade that can kill a demon. And you can't kill an angel, but we've now found a blade that you can. And then in the most recent season, it was like, you can't kill an archangel, but look, there's one blade that can.
Yeah.
So how do you come up with ways to defeat villains that are so bad, but don't feel cop-outy?
I think you definitely have to build it into the story earlier.
Yeah.
You know, like, you can't just have it be like, oh, as a writer, I've realized I've made this villain too unbeatable. Let me create something.
Yeah.
I think there has to be somehow like built up throughout the story.
That's a great thing about books. One of the major weaknesses about TV writing, and not a lot that the writers of TV can do about it, is because when they create that pilot, they only have what they have, and it's possible it can be canceled at any minute. So they just have to write that one thing, and you can't go back.
And even after that, you're writing a season at a time.
Exactly. So really, that does limit you with your storytelling ability, and it does create things like that because there's a lot in Supernatural that frustrates me, all very similar to what Megan said, is that it feels very tacked on at the last minute, and it is because they have, they're still limited.
And it's like, I love the villains most of the time. Like, there are very few villains on Supernatural that I haven't absolutely loved, but then when it's like, and all we need is this weapon that has been created for this season.
I think that's within the constraints of TV writing, you can still find a way to do it better than that. You know, you're creating this like villain, like create a way to beat them at the same time.
And they do have in the newer seasons, like they've been getting better and better, but still every now and then they're like, and here's this Archangel blade.
My pet peeve was just like, stop killing off all my favorite characters.
Oh, well, they realized we can't. And so they started bringing them all back. They were like, oh, we can't just kill off all the ladies to drive the men forward. And so they're all back.
Charlie's back? You just made a face.
I'm going to spoil Supernatural, the last season. So if you don't want the spoiler, pull out your earbuds right now. But yeah, Charlie's back.
Yay! I started watching Supernatural like season 6, so and I'm not going
to be fair, season 6 is awful.
They brought them back in a really interesting manner. So it's like Charlie, but not quite Charlie. But
are they getting rid of the spin-off show though?
No, they didn't do the spin-off. I'm so sad.
They were gonna do spin-off with the girls, but that got shut down.
Oh, it sucks. I was actually excited for that.
TV is sexist, so we don't do shows about girls. Natural realm, apparently.
I've got hopes though that like Hulu will pick it up or something.
Oh, probably. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
You want it.
Anyway, spoilers are over. You can come back.
Yeah, we didn't really say if we were going to give a signal for that. Whoops.
Whoops-a-daisy.
Yeah, I may get back into the show then, because that was when I rage quit.
I think, honestly, you could probably just, like, read summaries for 7, 8, 9, 10, possibly even 11, and just go back in at 12.
Yeah, I don't remember when I watched up until, but I did, like, watch a few episodes in spite of my rage afterwards, but they were kind of random, and I don't really know where I left off or what's going on. So
yeah, I got to the Leviathans, and I was like, I'm done with this. It's
probably just the same thing where they keep killing them off and bringing them back, because that was the whole thing. Let's see. Almost been going for an hour, but I figure we would bring up a couple of our other favorite bad guys. What about bad guys you guys don't like or didn't think was realistic? And don't have to name a specific book series or anything.
I already named Queen of the Tearling.
Okay.
I read a book recently that was like these, like the bad guys were mentioned throughout the book, but they played no significance until the last like 30 pages, and then it was resolved super quick. And it's a standalone, so it's not even like they're gonna come back later.
Oh, no, that's unfortunate.
That was anticlimactic.
One of my least favorite is actually like a very classic book series. I don't love Sauron from Lord of the Rings. And I'm sure if you like study the books more, maybe he has a more extensive backstory, I'm sure. But I felt he was very evil for the sake of being evil.
Yeah, he's a very like classic villain who like
obviously
doesn't really do
the
much.
Original villain, so he's allowed to be classic.
Yeah.
But I
don't even
like
think of him as an antagonist. I fully think of him as just like a villain, you know, or I don't even consider him that. Like he's just like this force to defeat at the end. Where I feel like there's a lot more like antagonists throughout the story, like Saruman and like Wormtongue and Gollum. Yeah, I feel like those are all, and like the Ring is more of an antagonist. Where he's just like
gets a lot of screen
he's
time.
just the goal. Like he's just the goal at the end, you know. Like he doesn't really do anything.
Pop into
except look at stuff.
Yeah.
An antagonist I really didn't like was Hans from Frozen. I loved the plot twist. The plot twist was really great. But if you like actually like watch movies how I watch movies and like break down every single like frame, his plan makes no sense. And it really bothers me.
What was the goal, Hans?
Like the whole he's like spoilers for Frozen if you haven't seen it. Hans is he's like if only someone loved you, and it's like, so your plan is to take over the kingdom, but you kind of need Anna alive to do that because you can't just come to a kingdom and say, yeah, this is mine now. Like,
I feel like his original plan makes sense. Like first he was gonna like romance Elsa, and then he realized that wasn't gonna happen. So he romanced Anna, and he was like, I'll marry her, we'll get rid of the older sister, we'll rule. But then he's like, I'm gonna get rid of both of them, and I'm just gonna say, this is mine now.
You didn't think this all the way through. This is why you aren't heir. Like
exactly. Like I hate
everything, Hans.
Like he could have just kissed Anna, and like if it worked, yay, it worked. They get married, his plan comes to life.
Right.
He kisses her, it doesn't work. She dies. But I mean he can still go along with the same plan, except she's actually dead and not leaving early, and she's actually alive.
He was a crappy antagonist because he was too impatient. If he had just pretended to fall for her, they got married, he bumped off Elsa, and then he eventually bumps off Anna, and then he's the sole ruler. But no, he just got impatient and was like, I'm gonna kill you now, and then that's why he's not the king.
This is like how not to take over a castle. Like a guide, like the guide to not taking over.
The guide to being a proper villain.
Yeah, the guide.
Apparently, he's getting a redemption arc though in Frozen 2. So
oh boo, really?
I'm excited. I want to see it. I want to know what they do. Yeah.
No, thank you.
I do think having a flaw like that can make a villain more compelling if done well.
I do like a villain who's kind of a screw up, I'll be honest, and he gets his own villain redemption arc. I really liked what the heck is his face in the new Star Wars movie, Kylo Ren. Yeah, I loved his little hissy fit.
I love them. That's why he's like one of my favorite characters.
Yeah,
because he throws a temper tantrum with a lightsaber. Like
Yeah, he's this incredibly, unspeakably evil villain, and he's got so much potential for evil. And then he's also a complete baby.
He's such a crybaby.
He has
He's
tantrums.
Yeah.
Yeah, and weirdly enough, I found that really compelling. And they did it because I should have found it annoying. I don't know why, but it was not annoying. It was like, I want to know why he's like this and what he turns into. Right? I don't know. I thought they did that pretty well.
I agree. I really like Kylo Ren's like temper tantrums. Like it made him like my favorite character. Like
I don't know why. Because I don't like tantrums in real life.
Like I hate it in real life, but like it gives him like depth because like you're not used to seeing villains.
Right.
Yeah.
Lose their shit pretty much. Yeah. I think
my way.
What it was.
Yeah.
Darth Vader was very regal, like gliding around.
Yeah.
And, like force choking people, and you would never see him just have a complete hissy fit. And so that's not what you're expecting. I think that's why it sort of startles you a bit.
Oh gosh, now I just thought about how Darth Vader's prequel story. How you just watch a villain get made for 3 movies. I have a lot of emotions about that, but
there's going to be 3 whole movies for him.
There were 3.
The prequels.
I thought they were doing more, and I'm like, what? We
don't need more.
Erin blocked out the prequels. She's like, no.
They were so bad. We blocked them right out.
I just blocked them out of my mind. The trauma.
Yeah, say what you will about how bad the prequels were. I loved them as a kid. As like a 12-year-old, I was all over that.
Oh man. We do not speak of them.
We do not speak of Hayden Christian Anderson's rat tail.
Oh my god, I thought it was so hot. I thought it was so cute. It's like a 12-year-old.
I'm learning so much about you, Megan.
Yeah. If you are also a fan of the prequels, I would highly recommend listening to Sumaya Dawood's First Draft podcast interview with Sarah Ennie. She is a staunch defendant of the prequels and will change your mind, possibly. It's incredible.
Were you also a fan of Jonathan Taylor Thomas when you were little?
No. I don't know. I love the making of a villain. And for some reason, it just... I mean, I liked Star Wars, too, obviously.
I think we were, like, still young enough that we didn't care quite so much about, like, if, like, the special effects weren't great. And, like, you know, some of the, like, things that as an adult, I'm like, wow, okay, this movie was not as good as it could have been.
The whimsy of Jar Jar Binks didn't drive me insane because I was 12 years old.
Yeah. And as a kid, I was like, this is amazing.
And Padme just ruled everything.
Yeah. I think I was too old and unimpressed with everything. I was at that perfectly snotty teenager stage when everything was uncool. So I was watching going, what is this crap? Swinging around with his lightsaber.
When I saw Phantom Menace, I hadn't seen the originals. Because I was like this like weird kid that was like, I'm not going to watch Star Wars. And then like Megan went to see Phantom Menace and her mom took me too. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll go see this because Megan was into Star Wars. She was like, I have to go see this. And then I was like, this is amazing. So like it got me into Star Wars. Like I watched the rest of them because of that movie. So
we've diverged from villains.
Star Wars is amazing. I'm not mad. I'm not mad at it.
Space villains.
Yeah, exactly.
Jabba the Hutt.
Jabba
the Hutt. Depending on who you talk to, was a villain as well.
Yes. My favorite conspiracy theory.
I was gonna say, Jar Jar's the Sith Lord, like, if you didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this one.
Yeah.
A pretty goofy Sith Lord.
Oh, when you read the breakdown.
It's like really clever.
You and your conspiracy theory.
Well, and it's also like, really interesting because like part of the theory is that like that was George Lucas's like plan, but then people hated Jar Jar Binks, so he ditched the plan. He was gonna make him a Sith Lord,
Interesting.
It's compelling. I hate conspiracy theories in real life, but I love them in fiction. Like Draco Malfoy's a werewolf. Let me read more.
I love that theory.
Ron is time traveling Dumbledore.
Yeah,
I gotta know.
That one seems pretty wild.
They're always wild.
Oh man. Any more villains you guys didn't find convincing or didn't love? I'm trying to think of one aside from Sauron because he seems obvious. In books. I'm looking at my bookshelf right
Yeah,
now.
like
Same.
There's another antagonist I hated, but I hated him because it was too real, and that's Nick from Fangirl. It's too close to home, man.
Yes, because you can feel the rage of how mad you would be if someone did that. Yes, if you have, well, I was going to say spoilers if you haven't read Fangirl.
Who hasn't read Fangirl
like
and still watches our channel, please?
If you've been following our channel, you should have read Fangirl. The amount we talk about it. But yeah, basically, as a writer, having someone plagiarize your work
and then take
and
credit
pass
for
it
it
off as theirs is like the most like the flames on the side of my face type of rage.
And like,
it happened to me before. So when I read that book, I was like, oh my God, he's not a real person, and I'm so mad.
Right? I'll never forget when I was reading that, and he was like, you know what? I think I'm just gonna turn this in as my final project.
Yeah.
I just stared at the book and I was like,
wait, what?
What? What? You won now? Like,
Cats arrested you.
Not okay. Yeah. Some contemporary antagonists are actually some of the most angry making for me. I don't know why. Maybe it's because those are feasible things that could actually happen and probably have happened.
Probably.
What was I reading lately? It was a contemporary one where the antagonist was really horrible. Oh, I just finished L.D. Crichton's All the Broken Pieces. It was an art copy, and it's so good. But the antagonist is there's multiple antagonists. One of them is her father, and her father was, one of those characters is like, I'm doing what's best for you type of antagonist, and those type drive me insane because he basically like sends her off to an institute, like an asylum essentially, because you're like, you need this, and she's like torn away from the guy that she loves. And I was like, oh my God, so mad the entire time, because it's very much a self-righteous parent thing to be like, I'm doing this for your own good, and it doesn't matter what you say. So even though he was the bad guy and not well, he didn't start out that way. He turned into like the worst of the bad guys, even there were other bad guys. So yeah, that was a contemporary that made me really mad the whole time.
Yeah.
It was really good. It was really good, but it made me really mad.
Yeah. Speaking of contemporary villains, one that like immediately came to mind for me when you mentioned contemporaries was in We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. The grandfather is very much the antagonist, but he is not present, like he's dead. And so you're coming up with this villain who, like, literally she's not going to get a pass. She has to overcome basically his ghost. And it wrecked me, but it was amazing.
Such a good book.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, it was so good.
I've heard of that.
Such a good, like, quiet contemporary, like, and it's like when I think it, like, because it like takes place on like this college campus during like winter break, and there's like a blizzard, and there's like 3 people on the campus, and like the whole book takes place there. And
I do like books like that.
Yeah,
it's like dealing with like memories and grief and stuff.
Oh, beautiful.
So good.
Another book to add to my towering to be read list.
Right.
Excellent.
Thanks, guys.
It's also Queer Girls, so you'll like that.
Ooh, okay.
Ooh.
All of Nina LaCour's books.
Yeah, like everything she writes.
That's awesome. So we have been going for an hour and a bit. Are there any kind of final thoughts about your favorite or least favorite, or how about an antagonist you love and that you love and the reason you love it? Anyone?
An antagonist that I what and I love?
That you have written yourself and what you loved about writing them.
Ooh.
Oh.
Ooh.
I wrote a POV book a long time ago that has since been shelved, where the main character was trying to hunt down a serial killer to clear her name, but she was really the serial killer the whole time. And I still have such a soft spot in my heart for that book, and I wish I could revisit it maybe someday.
Nato's coming.
Yeah. I've got a lot of other stuff coming way before that one. So but I loved it because she was the villain who was covering her tracks even to the reader. Which was so fun to write. It was an absolute blast.
That I think is the mark of a really good antagonist, if it's just really a lot of fun to write. Rachel, do you have a favorite antagonist? That's a face.
Not. I'm gonna say no, because like not one that I've developed enough to pinpoint as my favorite.
That's fair. Helen is next.
Oh yeah,
Singling you guys out.
For Scarlet, I have kind of two villains in it, and technically, like, the main character does really villainous things, and she does them very purposefully. And so I loved everything that had to do with her. I loved, but there's another villain that he's a very despicable human. And I had a lot of fun with his stuff too, but he's not as prominent until like the last half. So.
Emma?
I like the antagonist in the book I'm writing right now because it's like one of those cases where like as the reader you don't know who it is until like near the end of the book, and I'm really excited to write the reveal for it because I already know I'm going to do it. Yeah, and so I love it because it's like one of those kind of like hidden in plain sight type of things where it's like someone the main character knows, and the main character knows that it's someone that she knows, and she doesn't know which person it is. So, like the whole time, it's her being like, "Who can I trust among like people that I've known my whole life?"
So much tension.
Yeah. So getting to have like an antagonist who's like behind the scenes the whole time because the reader can't know who it is, and the main character doesn't know who it is, but they're like continuously like doing things. So
I love
difficult but fun. So.
Keep you guessing the whole time. And Desiree?
My favorite antagonist that I've written is probably Serena from my Mermaid book. And it's mostly because, like, one, she's like the main character's sister, and I really like that because they're like extremely similar. Like they were raised by the same people, and her sister's like Serena's super, super evil, but with good reason. But I think the reason she's my favorite is because I gave her like a really cool power. She's a mermaid, and she has the power of electricity, like electric eels do. So that's why I like her.
So she can electrocute other mermaids, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's cool.
She has the power to control like lightning and storms. Like she's a stormbringer. Is like the subgroup she belongs to.
Storm mermaid.
Yeah,
that's very cool. So probably my favorite is in the book that I just finished writing. A character named Cora, and basically
yes.
I've both read this book. Basically she's sort of on the right team and sort of doing what she thinks is going to save everyone, but in really despicable ways. She'll just do anything to achieve what she wants to get.
I love her like motivations. Like
she's really fun to write because she had kind of multiple motivations and really justifies, like, ultimately she wants power, but she's justifying that in different ways, saying like, oh, I'm just saving my coven, I'm doing this for my coven, because she's a witch. I should say that. People are like, what? And so she's justifying all of that by saying that, but really what she wants is to take over her coven and become the leader and achieve that power.
And there's always like the part of me as like a woman and a feminist. It's like, yes, girl, get that power. And like Cersei in Game of Thrones, I'm like, yes, burn them all down. They have have wronged you.
I know. I'm like, is it weird to be smiling while I'm like, and then she carves out his heart. I'm like, oh, oh no.
Every time like Daenerys set someone on fire, I'm like, yes.
Oh man, that reminds me of this college humor sketch where it's like this female detective and they're like trying to find a serial killer, and that the cop is talking to her and he goes, oh, blah blah blah, she, and this that female detective goes, wait, it's a she? The serial killer is a she? And he's like, yeah, she murdered all these people. And she's like, you go, girl. Girl power. I mean, it's horrible, but girl power.
We can be serial killers too.
And in the end, she catches the serial killer, and the serial killer is like, you're a female detective? You go, girl. So good. Because it's true. Even though they're unspeakably evil, you're kind of like, you're kind of a badass as well.
Yeah. Yes, the world has wronged us all as women.
Yeah.
We all have secret pockets of anger deep inside. The bees, right? That's what oh, man. Anyway, so we've been, on that note,
Yeah.
we've been going for a little over an hour. Any final thoughts on how to write believable villains from anyone?
Treat them the same
Aside
way you
from-
treat your protagonists.
Yes.
Yeah.
When it comes to development,
Mm-hmm.
which is something
All
I
the
always have to
heroes.
remember to do. Because it is
Mhm.
easy to be like, oh, this bad person who wants to do bad things. Let's stop them. Like, that's really the easy way to write a story, but it's not the
Mhm.
best way.
Mm-hmm. We're all the heroes of our own story. It's a good thing to remember. And I often like to write my heroes having almost the opposite goal of whatever my protagonist has, and they have to butt heads in order to each get their own goal. So
And really, like, don't hold back. I know the inclination, particularly in first drafts, can be to not hit your protagonist where it will hurt them the absolute most, because then you as the writer have to pick up the pieces. But your villain isn't going to be a compelling villain unless they are willing to inflict the most damage on your protagonist. So just like really go for it. Don't hold any punches.
Good advice. That's what makes the stakes really high, is if the reader knows that the villain is going to do literally anything to get what they want, no matter what it does to the people in their way. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. You guys were awesome. You had lots of questions, and we will be here next week talking about
Furthermore.
I do not have a
Club.
So we have book club. If you haven't read Furthermore by Tahara Mafi, you should do that. It's an amazing book, and it doesn't take too long. It's a middle grade book. And we will see you next week. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye.